Hey, this is Justin, and if you've watched this far, you probably already know that you are watching NEMO Fishing. And in this episode, I want to talk about catching little fish. Of course, everybody likes to catch big fish, but sometimes the big fish aren't biting, whether that's because of weather or time of year or because of spawning or post-spawn, and the big fish just aren't biting. But you know what? It can be really fun to catch little fish too. And boy, I like to do it. And when I catch little fish, one of the first things I think about is the fact that you don't need to use a big rod and reel and thick, heavy line to catch little fish. In fact, light spinning gear, light spinning tackle with 6 or 8 pound test, or sometimes even 4 pound test for ultra clear water is the way to go for catching smaller fish. And if you like to eat fish, these are some of the best fish to eat. Smaller bass taste better. Of course, we're talking about fish like bluegill, or some people call them brim, or perch, green sunfish, crappie, both white and black crappie. These are what I'm talking about as far as little fish. And they are fun to catch on light tackle, especially ultralight. They can be a blast. So don't be afraid to target little fish when the big fish are hiding out. So what tactic do I like to use? Well, I know some people use the traditional method of bobbers and hooks and worms or crickets or whatever bait you want to use. You can even use bread or dough baits, and you can definitely catch your share of fish like that. But I like more active fishing, where I'm casting and retrieving and hooking on a fishing lure. And so I'm going to use lures that are small. For example, I like inline spinner baits. So we're talking the Warden's Rooster Tail with all its various colors and willow blades, sizes. They're relatively inexpensive lures. You don't have to invest a lot in them, and man, they work great for little fish. I also like your normal spinner baits, but at a smaller size. So I know Strike King puts some out, the Rocket Shad is an example, but there's all kinds of smaller spinner baits out there that work really well for smaller fish, even the smaller mouthed fish. I also like marabou jigs, either using them under a bobber with a fly rod, almost like a crappie rod or a cane pole, only you casting it and retrieving it. Or sometimes I like to use road runners, and they can come in a different little different format, whether that's a plastic lure or with a little spinner attached. But anyway, you're going to use lures that are typically faster retrieved and make a little flash and trigger a reaction strike. Sometimes there's even little bitty tiny crankbaits that can be used to trigger those reaction strikes. So that is some fantastic lures for fishing with, or fishing for, little fish. Now, where are you going to fish for those little fish? Well, typically I like to go to a lake or a farm pond, and I find the dam of the lake. And often these dams will have riprap, or that's that rocky, those rocks along the dam, the big white rocks along the dam, and it extends into the water, and those fish like to hide in there. Little fish like to take cover in there and then dart out when they see something they can eat. So it's a hiding space for them. And I've often found also that the wind, depending on where the wind is coming from, but that is often a windy place on the lake. And it's a great place for the whole food column to be pushed toward the dam. And so if you are facing the wind on the dam, the wind is blowing in your face, the whole food chain is going to be pushed towards you. And it starts with the plankton and the little bitty tiny microscopic fish that the a little bit smaller fish or a little bit bigger fish are going to eat. That's going to bring in your bluegill and your brim, your crappie, black and white, and all those smaller fish and smaller bass. And the whole food chain is going to be pressed up against the dam because of the wind. And so that's a great place to target when you want to catch some little fish. Here's another tactic that I like to use, and that's with the fly rod, but not a traditional fly. I put a little bobber stop on there with a small little bobber, and then underneath that I put a marabou jig. And you can adjust the bobber stop for how deep you think the fish are. If they're biting a little deeper, you move the bobber stop up the line a little bit. If they're a little shallower, you move it closer to the lure, and then you cast that out. And sometimes the action of the waves itself will trigger that marabou jig to go up and down in the water and trigger a bite. But you can also pop it and bring it back just a couple inches at a time to trigger a bite. And that's another simple way to catch fish on that dam. So I hope you've got a little bit of inspiration to go out and catch some little fish. Until next time, I hope you've enjoyed Nemo fishing, and hey, get out there and catch some fish.